I'm Ed Adams, and you're listening to the AFCA Podcast. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Season 3 of the AFCA Podcast. And on this episode, we talk focus groups, market research, and the ethos of big data in entertainment with Invoke CEO Gigi Wang. We'll take a deep dive into this topic after the break. The AFCA Podcast is sponsored by Morgan Stanley Global Sports and Entertainment. Focus groups are an integral part of the studio business. Everything is tested, and I mean everything. Networks test show pilots, studios test movies, trailers, even posters are brought before everyday Janes and Joes so executives can give the thumbs up or the thumbs down on the projects in their lineup. This information helps them decide what movies we'll see in the theaters, what shows will make the fall lineup, and what commercials will air during the Superbowl. But as the industry had to adjust this model for production and distribution during 2020, Invoke, a tech-driven marketing research company, leveraged their technology to take the once in-person fact-finding research sessions of focus groups and made them virtual. What Invoke is doing is groundbreaking. In these virtual focus groups, participants use their phones and tablets to interact while watching content. And this provides real data insights in real time to studio executives, producers, and directors. To understand all this, we need to go behind the curtain and talk to the wizard herself, CEO of Invoke, Gigi Wang. Gigi has helmed Invoke for over 4 years and has spent her career in technology, consulting, and marketing research. I recently spoke to Gigi Wang via Zoom to learn what drew an up-and-coming engineer to marketing research, the ins and outs of virtual focus groups, and some life lessons she's learned along the way. Gigi, welcome to the AFCA Podcast. Thank you for participating with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Before we get into the meat and potatoes, the nitty gritty of all this, tell us what Invoke is. Talk to us about Invoke and what does it provide? Because you do provide a lot of research solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Invoke is a technology company. And what we do is we provide a technology-enabled market research service. So what does that mean? It means that what we do for companies, we're mostly in the entertainment and media space, but we also serve a lot of the large brands, the large global brands that advertise in media today. And we offer an enterprise scale platform that does 3 things. We, number one, answer the what and the why. Easy to have lots and lots and lots of data. We're swimming in oceans of data. Easy to find correlation, but it's difficult to find causation. So we answer that, the what and the why. Number 2, we do it quickly. We do it in real time. So, lots of different technologies offer real-time data, but we actually enable our clients to make real-time decisions, to make decisions in real time. We have producers, showrunners, marketing executives all in the same virtual room with us. And then we're taking this journey with hundreds of consumers in a live conversation. And they can make decisions on the spot. They can make decisions on which ending to go with. What's the title? Did you like this scene? Did you like this character? We can check key art. We can look at character arcs, story arcs, and enable those executives to make decisions in real time. And then number 3, the reason we can do that is we bring all the stakeholders together. So the showrunner, the producer, the marketing people, the consumer insights people, they're all in our virtual room together, taking this 1-hour journey, ending up with a decision. So that's a very long-winded answer to what we do.
No, that's pretty intense. That's a lot. But specifically for movies, when we think of focus groups, we kind of think of the traditional setup. You're kind of in a room. There's a lot of feedback because you're in a room with a lot of people. there's a lot of people participating in this, watching this TV show or watching a segment of a movie or watching a trailer, but yours is very insulated. So tell me, how does that, when you think about how we traditionally see focus groups,
Mhm.
and you just explained how you facilitate focus groups, really, how does that data, what does that do for the data, and how do the studios get more from these experiences?
So that is such a great question for so many different levels. Number one, the traditional focus group experience has been around for a long time, and it made a lot of sense because in the past, a theatrical production film would be released to theater first. So it made sense to have people come to a site, view the film, answer a lot of questions. But we're in a different era today. I mean, look at the kids today. Look at us. We're streaming content and we're watching, we're not going to theaters. Even pre pandemic, we weren't going to theaters as much. We were streaming content. We're watching less linear television. So the so the world is changing, and because of that, it's a lot of the studios have come to us because when we're talking to these consumers are in the environment in which they consume the content. So they're not going to the theaters, they're streaming it. So, we're catching them when they're in front of their devices, and we're able to have them in that situation in situ. So we talk to them when they're in situ. And so we can capture we put them in that environment that they're in when they're consuming the content. And so we get better data.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, you mentioned a whole bunch of aspects of traditional focus groups, and you might have been participated in some. You might have been called for jury duty. It's kind of feels like the same thing
Mhm.
because one really loud voice, and a lot of the other people. You have what 8, 10, 12 people in a focus group. Get one loud voice, and then you get half of the remainder of the people are shrinking violets, and they're not going to answer. And then maybe someone will speak up with an opposing view. Um, but in but when you're in a virtual situation like the virtual teams that we have, every single person has a voice, and it's not influenced. And in this day and age, with everyone writing on social media, people give us such rich verbatims, and because we have this technology, we can actually process and analyze all the verbatims at the same time. So our dashboard, we're sitting there with the producer and the showrunner. We're looking at our dashboard, and it's showing us the trending sentiments and the trending words as these responses come in real time. So it's just kind of a modern day version of getting a really deep conversation going with hundreds of people at the same time.
Oh, wow. All right. I got to follow up on that one because the one
We'll
thing
invite
that
you
you
to one.
said, the one thing that you said was dashboard. And so I was curious about the user experience. Um, because of the fact that you are watching, you're ingesting the information, and then you're also distributing in real time what people are seeing on these dashboards, the feedback.
Mhm.
Talk to me about how did you flush out what was a good user experience for the viewer, but also for the studios?
Yeah, and that's really, really important to us, both sides. On the viewer side, we actually do ask after every single session we do. We have standard 2 questions at the end. How was your experience, and would you do it again? And we get a 96 to 98% absolutely love the experience and would like to do it again from the participants, from the consumers, the viewers. And we do want to make it as comfortable for them as possible, which is why it works so well when they're in the comfort of their own homes or in their offices, wherever they are, and they're using their favorite devices. Everything is familiar. So, it's very comfortable for them. Also, unlike theaters, everyone is streaming the content. So while we may have 300 or 500 people start at the same time, they meet us, in it for this live discussion. But everyone might be starting at a slightly different time, but it's all streamed. So
Hmm.
when they're ready, they're sitting down, they're comfortable, they have their drinks, they have their whatever, and they start the video. So it's a good experience, and we really do ask them questions and look at the responses. On the client side, with the studios, they're sitting in with us. What's wonderful is traditionally, when focus groups were done, they would be behind the one-way glass, as you know, and um, oftentimes it's hard to, you just have to follow the questionnaire that the moderator has. It's very difficult to ask questions, to react to individual responses. I've been in those focus group rooms with producers, and you almost have to grab them because they want to go through the glass and say, that's wrong. What did that person mean? And you literally almost have to hold them, although everyone's afraid to grab onto a producer. I can tell you that. Um, and I've been in situations very recently where a producer said, these people, the same people are talking, the same two people are talking. We have to get the other people to talk. Let's bring in some food. And that doesn't really, you can't do that. And you can't encourage them to talk. However, when they're all connected on electronically this way, we have the capability of having a one-on-one discussion with anyone. And it's private, it's a private chat. And if someone is just giving one word answers, we can prompt them and say, hey, Ed, you answered this. Do you have any more thoughts on that? We can kind of prompt them a little, not in a certain direction, but just say, do you have more to speak about? Or if you have a comment that is really, really thought-provoking, the producer can actually ask you a little bit more detail, and then we can at any time add any number of questions out to the entire group. So it's really interactive. And we've had producers talk to each other and just say, I knew it. I knew that they would think this. And, can we just ask them a follow-up question? And we say, absolutely. We'll ask them a follow-up question right there. And that's how they can make decisions so quickly, because we're not just testing the content, we're helping them optimize the content.
That's awesome. But something I want to bring up is bias. And I would love your take on this. So as a market research company, there's one thing that we all know that is part of the data that you filter is bias. But we've just seen with Black Lives Matter, giving roles to women, being in the room, breaking the glass ceiling. It's not uncommon to have these conversations in the entertainment industry that we know that these biases exist. So my question, I'm just kind of curious, as a market researcher who focuses on these focus groups, how do you instruct or guide the conversation when you're talking to these studios about their biases? And how do you filter that, or how do you explain that information to them?
Yeah, and that's actually there's a lot of depth to that question and to the response as well. And maybe I can take it in two different parts.
Sure.
Number one, yeah, in market research, especially, my background is working with a lot of global firms and a lot of global companies, and now even the content is developed more and more for not just the US audience, but for a worldwide audience. There are natural biases that exist. So for a long time, in market research, if a company is doing a global study, and we would have, for example, people participating from dozens of countries around the world, we always used to use examples of consumers in Brazil tend to always be very positive, and anytime you wanted to have something rated on a 10-point scale, you would get a whole bunch of answers up in the 10, with 10 being the best, no matter what, how much did you like it, how happy you were, and all these things. Then on the other end, the example that's always used is Japan, because people tend to be more cautious. It's not that they're any less happy, it's just culturally, they tend to really reserve the 10 for something that's really, 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 really outstanding. And so you tend to have a group of responses that tend, generally lower on that scale. So, there have been methodologies to normalize the data across different cultures. In what we do, and in entertainment in particular, I feel like and this might be a little different than what you hear from other people. I feel like sometimes we can actually use those biases to our advantage in research. And I say that because more and more original content is coming on the market. And if you look at, what's being spent and just the number of shows that are being created, it's just increasing. It's increased exponentially over the last 5 years and will continue to do so, which means that more of the programs are targeted for a specific audience. And so I think some of those cultural biases are, they'll be they could be biases, but some of it could just be cultural nuances that we're all learning about more. And they're being built into films more. And some of it's just kind of progression of kind of the evolution of content. So let me give you an example. So, we've tested some programs recently where the content, the story is actually taking place in a particular place. So we tested one. The story was taking place in the deep South. And we actually had to learn that there's the South. The South is not homogeneous. There are different, even segments there. And then we had to really go into and test the language. How authentic was the language? And this is something the studio needed to learn. And the showrunner also wanted to make sure that we recruited plenty of people that were from that exact area so that we could test how authentic is it. Is it someone faking a Chinese accent, or is it, really someone with a Chinese accent? And so I think some of that is just learning. Some of that we can use to our advantage because we're all learning. And if I may just add one more point about our methodology. One of the advantages to using a virtual methodology like we have instead of in-person focus groups is, what are the chances if you intercept 10 people in Atlanta or 10 people in LA that you're going to have one from that exact part of the country, have another person from the north, and you're not going to find that. And or if we're testing a second season, for series maintenance, what are the chances you're going to intercept 10 people at the mall who have seen the season one? It's not going to happen. So by using our methodology, we really have that selectivity. So, again, we're not just talking to 10 people, we have the scale. We're not just talking, we're not taking a long time. It happens really quickly. Everyone's online, so we have the speed. And then the selectivity is really important. And oftentimes we intentionally select people who have consumed that media versus, people who haven't. And so we use that bias. If someone's a regular fan of a particular show or liked a film or, likes a certain genre, they're going to be biased towards that genre and those shows. The people who don't watch it are going to maybe be biased, against it, or maybe just be ignorant, which sometimes, causes, I don't know whether cause and effect is, but we use that to our advantage. Mm-hmm. So, we compare the dial scores between the two segments. We intentionally recruit those two cohorts so that we can compare. So sometimes and that helps. It helps the studios because sometimes it's a bias and sometimes it's just, it's the way I've always learned it. And it's the way I've always thought about a particular part of the population. So it's learning too, not always intentional bias.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned, how you get your samples. And I was curious about that. So you did mention some of the sources, but when you're developing your groups, how much of it is studio driven and how much of it is organic through Invoke and your selection process?
Yeah, it's always studio driven because we ask them what they want to do. So a producer will, if it's a pilot, we may test it against the general population and then we recruit so that it's representative of the general population. Oftentimes when we're testing a pilot for a studio, the show is intended for a specific audience. I mean, more and more so, just because there's so many shows, we just went through that. And so they may ask us to make sure that you um, I'll just use an example of, okay. Remember when Murphy Brown was being brought back?
Hmm.
Maybe we wanted to recruit, it hadn't been brought back yet, so so there were no viewers, but maybe the studio, and this is not what the studio asked, but this is just an example. They might have looked at, well, gee, it was so successful. Bringing Roseanne back was so successful. Let's recruit, 50% Roseanne viewers and 50% non, and see if we brought another show back, if it would be just as successful. So, they will request a certain profile. And because they know that we can recruit such a large audience, that's just not attainable in a focus group, it's a large enough audience that we can have all these sub segments. So we can balance the men and the women and the age and the viewers and non-viewers. So oftentimes they give that to us. If they don't, we will suggest something. Well, we just want to make sure that we're going to be satisfying their audience. And it's super important to their marketing folks as well. They have to be marketing to that audience. And then they have to understand what's going to resonate with that audience about the show so that they can pull out those messages in their ads and their trailers.
Oh, wow. But it made me kind of think about something that a lot of times we think and don't think about. It's a very specific segment to research, and that's kids, especially kids television for kids. Um, in traditional settings, you're there with the kid, with the parents nearby.
Mhm.
So how is that different in your environment? Because a kid may be watching from a tablet. So how is that family dynamic addressed in that space, or is it addressed? Or how is that for your company? How do you address it, or do you have kids programming as far as your focus groups?
Yeah, we actually specialize. I'm so glad you asked that question. We actually specialize in testing children's programs. And personally, I love a lot of the children's programming just because we have so much violence in some of our shows. I just love getting away from some of that once in a while. And so what we do is there are a lot of rules around laws around protecting children. So we actually recruit children through the parents. And what's really cool about our methodology is we let the children watch through a tablet. They don't have to use a laptop. And the parents oftentimes are sitting next to the children. And what we can do with our methodology is we have some questions that we want that we ask of the children, and the parents are sitting right there. So, they're supervising, and we've recruited them through the parents. And then we also have some questions for the parents. And so we can look at the parents' reaction and compare it with the children's reaction. And it's super, super helpful. And it's really fun. And it's really
Oh.
cute.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. One of the things I find, kind of really interesting is what that meter looks like. We're all accustomed, well, some of us, not everybody, but most of us are used to the dials, right?
Yeah.
Um, as a way to gauge things. And we do it from everything from politics to do we like a TV show pilot?
Yep.
But in this situation, I mean, it's a virtual dial, or how exactly does that work? Is it a slider? What are they actually
Exactly.
gauging?
Hey, you've been there. You know that. It is a slider. So
Okay.
yeah, so you're watching the film on whatever the device is, and then at the bottom it's a slider. So it's a horizontal line, goes from end to end. There's a red dot in the middle, and then you move it left to right. The dot is the 50, and what's really cool with our methodology is you can set the dial for whatever you want. So for example, we may tell people that to slide the dial back and forth depending on how much you like or dislike what you're watching at the moment. However, we may be testing a game show, and or we may be testing, a comedy, and we may ask them to slide the dial back and forth depending on how funny something is at the moment. When we test news, which we do a lot, we ask for trustworthiness because that's what's really important in news. So as you're watching what at the moment, whether you're watching the anchor or a special reporter or someone on the scene, we ask them to slide the dial back and forth based on trustworthiness, how trustworthy you think it is. And this has been huge for us because data is data. Data is the truth. I'm not being political here, but data is data, so it's not fake.
We've talked about bias, but the question I'm curious about is distraction,
Yeah,
because of the fact that you are in this kind of I don't want to get too technical with people, but you are in this kind of isolated monadic research, silo. How do you deal with distraction? Because it's so easy to be distracted when you're by yourself watching or ingesting content.
yeah, and that's a really important for us as well. We deal with it in a few ways. First, you have to make it fun for the participants as well. So we make sure that we vary the questions. Some questions are multiple choice, some questions are ranking, and some questions are completely open-ended. We have a lot of open-ended questions. This is how we can get at the why. Tell us in your own words why you liked this character, and that really engages people because people love to give their opinions, and so we make sure we mix a lot of that in. We also have other things in our methodology. So, for example, sometimes we can ask the participants to vote on other people's responses. So we have questions. It's really cool. It's kind of like almost like a mini Delphi. So everyone responds, and after they respond, they don't even know they get to vote. We'll just say, thank you for answering that question. Now, here are the top 3 responses from everyone else. What do you think of these top responses? And they can vote or comment on each one of the top 3 responses. Again, because everything is real time, it's done by a machine. So, and people like that. It's kind of fun. It's
Wow.
yeah, and then the dial, people like, they like moving it back and forth. But I have to say, our dial data throughout all of the episodes we've done, they really track very well, because we're in the room with the producers as they're watching the episode or the film. They're moving the dial, and we get the aggregated dial in real time. So we see that dial trace, just like on Fox News and CNN. During a debate, you see the dial trace moving along. We see it moving along, and we look at the high points and the low points, and then we ask them questions about it, and it correlates. When we look at their evaluation of that, the evaluation of the characters, when we look at their intent to view, it correlates, very, very well. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, when you're looking at a set of data, it works itself out.
See, I thought I was done asking research questions, but now you just made me want to ask another. But just more, this is more kind of akin to something that really is important to a lot of people right now. So, this country has taken, the industry has taken a major hit with COVID, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure that your business has been affected by it in some good ways and some bad ways. But something I was just kind of curious about is specifically when it comes to people engaging with you in research. There's a lot of things about like fatigue, the way that people ingest films, like a lot of people binge watch. So how when you're setting up your focus groups, how do you kind of set up the criteria per se? Like, for example, and this may not apply, but I'm just curious because like I know for myself, I binge a lot of television. And then some days I'm just not in the right mode of thinking to really take in a lot of stuff. So in a time where you have a lot of like COVID fatigue, television overload, group depression about where we are as a country right now, beyond the politics, but mostly about where we are right now, where we're just insulated constantly. Is there a filter, or how do you, as a market researcher, how do you look at this weird phenomenon culturally that we're in right now?
Yeah, it's so sad. Just this whole pandemic is so sad. For us as a company, it obviously it's affected us because production has shut down. Studios just had to shut all their production rooms from the middle of March. However, we've actually, as a company, done really well in this year for a number of reasons. First, we've all been isolated. We've been shut up, you know, kept at home in a lockdown. And so it's been easier for us actually to recruit these participants because number one, they're home, they're working from home, they don't have to commute, and it's an opportunity for them to engage with someone from the outside. And so it's actually been easier for us. For our clients, the studios, we've become known as the Zoom of content testing because we don't have to get people in the room. They can't get people in the room. They haven't been able to for the last 10 months and maybe 9 months. And and so this is an option that they've had to go to. And I don't think that coming out of the pandemic that will change because a number of things, but most importantly, because it's so much easier to reach a large audience across the whole nation, around the world, actually. So we've done more internationally in the past 9 months and more testing in a different way. So that's one thing. We've offered a solution to get past the pandemic, and going forward, they see that more people are streaming, more people are binge watching, and even television programming. They're watching it streamed as opposed to linearly, and so this method of testing is going to help in that environment. Um, but also, I think for the studios, the other thing that we've noticed is they are really using technology a lot more and earlier. So rather than just testing rough cuts that are ready to go to the edit bay, we're testing way before that. During the pandemic, script writers have had to rewrite their scripts. They've rewritten large scenes into smaller scenes because even after we have a vaccine, you're not going to be able to get 500 people, all packed together in a scene, or even 50 people. So we've been able to help them test just with sketches, with animatics, even just test previous, so we've been doing a lot of testing just on art, just on the background, and what would people like to see? What would you like to see this character, the lead character? How would you like them to look? We've tested a lot of films and just to try to identify what would work well in a sequel before they actually start writing it and committing to it. So a lot of this testing, it will save them so much grief and so much money and time because they're testing. So right now we're giving all these studios as much data as Netflix has from the get-go. And they call us the money ball of testing.
The money ball of testing. I love it.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think I got all my market research questions out of the way. I may have some more. Who knows? You represent like less than 8% of all American CEOs. And I'm just kind of curious as a woman, and more importantly as a woman of color, how do you feel about being in a space where maybe you feel like you've broken through that ceiling, or maybe you feel like you've just cracked it? But just as a whole, like, how do you feel as a female CEO in America in the space that we're in right now?
Yeah, that's a question that I've thought about a lot more recently than ever before. When I was growing up, I've got to say, I ran into a lot more hurdles as a woman, as a female, than I had of a person of color. Partly, maybe because I grew up in New York, maybe because I've always loved tech. I've always loved science. And in technical fields, I saw a lot of Asians, a lot of South Asians, North Asians, and it was just, I saw a lot fewer women. And so that was more of my ceiling. But the one thing that happened during the pandemic is I've really have realized that I'm not only a person of color, but my exact ethnicity is Chinese. And with the pandemic, I've never seen so many people react like with true fright seeing a Chinese person because the coronavirus came from China, and that whole comment about it being the China virus, although no one's called that to my face, I've had people with me that have witnessed how people react when I walk into a place and walk in online outside. And it was interesting. It opened my eyes a lot. I'm not blaming anyone. It's not a complaint. It's just that it made me more self-aware.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think that self-awareness is good. When I look at my role, to answer your question as a CEO, I think um, there have been more, there's been more attention paid to that. And I do think that women in general and people of color in general are breaking through that ceiling. I've always looked to other groups growing up, and then, becoming more part of society as an adult. Not that I wasn't as a child, but for some reason I was much more self-centered as a child and just worried about passing my next test. But as an adult and, hopefully a productive person in society, I've been a lot more aware. I've always looked to some other groups because I look at Asian Americans, for example, and Asians around the world. Yeah, some Asians have been able to attain a lot of wealth, but there are other groups that have done more. I look at any number of groups. I look at African Americans, and they have been able to get political power. They've been able to break into government a lot more than Asians. How did they do that? I think the lessons that I've learned is it's a very cohesive group, and so I asked myself, um, what can we do more to make our voices heard? Maybe it's not that it's too small a group, there's a large number, but maybe we're not saying the right things. Maybe we're not speaking the language of everyone else. So it's actually been really enlightening. And I've had an opportunity during the pandemic to, think more about that.
Oh, wow.
It's actually really interesting for me. To answer your question, I hope that it'll change. I do see more women joining boards, and that's how I got my role. I was on the board before I became CEO, and I think that there's a lot of women helping women. So for a long time, I've always worked. I was always a geek, and it was, and it was just weird to be a girl geek. But I've always, for years, worked with colleges and high schools, just encouraging girls and I guess women in college to pursue those technical fields.
Okay. Well, I do have a question about that because I'm African American and I navigate through my world, through this space based on the the life lessons or the things that we're taught that we have to do to succeed. So I was kind of curious for you because you mentioned, you were a geek and you were kind of focused on your things, but I would imagine that there were some kind of traditions or institutional traditions that you've had to overcome or had to learn to navigate through to get to where you are. And I was just wondering if you could share just a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned beyond what you just mentioned about how different there's different factions of Asian groups, but just more importantly, you as your person as a person growing up and learning how to navigate yourself in New York and learning how to navigate yourself into the space to become where you want to be right now.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You know, growing up as a minority, I was always different, and it didn't matter where I was. If I spent some time in the Midwest working my first job, and I think that I just grew up knowing that I had to be twice as good as anyone else. I was different, and you do have to be accepted. As a child, there were lots of playground taunts. I just grew up with those, and I'm sure you've heard them as well. So it's you just have to let that um, you have to kind of get mature really quickly, or it can really break you down, and get past that. And I think the wonderful thing is for me personally is my family was really supportive, and I didn't really understand or appreciate what my parents always taught me until I got a little bit older. But they would always say, you've just got to ignore that and you've got to be better than them. And there were times when I wanted to pick a fight and I would just say, it's so not fair. And they said, it's not fair. They wouldn't argue with me that it was fair. They would just kind of go along and really push me to be better than everyone else. And what they were saying is, you have to be twice as good to be accepted. And so I think it just instilled in me this need to really push myself harder.
What has this experience of COVID taught you about yourself that you didn't know?
Wow, that's such a good question. I think what the one thing that COVID has really taught me personally is that we really have to stick together, and it really does take a village, and that village may actually be a much, much larger thing than a village. We needed to support each other at the company, at Invoke. We've needed to support each other so much more. Outside of Invoke, we've actually developed a closer relationship with many, many of our clients. Because again, our clients they've had production rooms shut down. They've gone through massive furloughs and massive layoffs. We're helping them. We're reaching out. They've reached out to us. And the one thing that I've learned is that there really is a humanity. And it's been such a sad situation to see so many hundreds of thousands of people lose their lives. But the rest of humanity, the way we've been able to come together outside of our own little family, into our extended family with clients and with even strangers, has just been actually heartwarming.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. That was Gigi Wang, CEO of Invoke Solutions, giving us a primer on virtual focus groups and big data. Now, did you know that Americans stream more drama and thrillers than sports and reality television? Or that only 38% of Americans say that they're more likely or extremely likely to go to theaters in 2021? Well, I learned this and more reading Invoke's report deconstructing which platforms and genres Americans are streaming. You can download this report and learn more marketing insights by going to Invoke's website at invoke.com and checking out their blog. I also recommend following Invoke on Twitter for daily research nuggets like these. And that's our show. Thanks again to Gigi Wang and her team for making this interview happen. And have you been keeping up with AFCA lately? We have a new website chock full of information and content, and our YouTube channel has tons of interviews and educational programming for you to watch. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So until next time, keep your head up.